In this particular vision, come up hither. This is kind of a big key one here, and we're going to go kind of slow, and we'll end up going a little bit backwards. This is the one we're going to go back to. We're going to revisit the conversion experience and him dying. We're going to revisit that a little bit in this particular vision, because
Okay.
we're going to come up against some contradictions that we're going to find here. So at any rate, that's the whole thing. And I was going to suggest we need to set this up. So set up the setting here. So if you want to read there that subheading where it says a young man's vision, and this way, this will give the story of when this happened in 1950, and it kind of sets the table. And then there's several comments we're going to be making along the way.
One of the fulfillments of Joel's prophecy and the outpouring of the Spirit was that your young men shall see visions. He takes this from Joel chapter 2, verse 28 in the Amplified Bible. He says, the Amplified Bible says, your young men shall see visions. That is divinely granted appearances. In the next pages, I want to tell you about a divinely granted appearance I had when I was a young man, 33 years old. At the time of this experience, I was conducting a tent revival in Rockwall, Texas, during the latter part of August and the first part of September 1950. On Saturday, September the 2nd, it rained all day. Not a hard driving rain, but a slow, gentle, soaking rain. It was still raining that evening at church time, and when we arrived at the tent, there were only about 40 people present. Rockwall is in the Blackland of north central Texas. And there is a saying that if you stick with the Blackland when it is dry, it will stick with you when it is wet. Many of the people who had been attending the meetings lived in the country, and they couldn't get out to the service that night because of the rain and mud. That's why the crowd was small. Because everyone present was a Christian, I gave a Bible lesson and then invited the people to come to the front to pray. It was about 9:30. Let me say here that I no more expected what was to happen than I expected to be the first man to land on the moon. I hadn't been doing any unusual praying or fasting. I hadn't been praying that I would have such an experience. In fact, I hadn't even thought about such a thing. Everyone was praying around the front, and I knelt on the platform beside a folding chair near the pulpit. I began to pray in other tongues, and I heard a voice say, "Come up hither." At first, I didn't realize that the voice was speaking to me. I thought everybody heard it.
Okay, let's pause just for a second here, because I want to go back to the beginning there where he mentions the Amplified Bible. And he says, your young men shall see visions. And then in parentheses, he adds, that is divinely granted appearances. I'm a layman. I'm not a minister as you are. And I've looked at several different translations. I've looked at different Bible commentaries, excuse me, and I cannot find where anybody else calls this divinely granted appearances. Are you aware of anywhere where it might suggest that as a possible translation or a possible meaning in that scripture?
I am not. In fact, this is, and I've grown up in the church. I've spent 38 years in the church. This is really the first time I even remember hearing them called this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And again, this is like, as I said, in one of our other sessions, this is why Hagin and so many of the Word of Faith people like to use the Amplified translation, or they like to find, as I mentioned last time when we were talking about faith in Mark 11:22, where Hagin used the Emphasized Bible, and he found this translation says, have the faith of God, not faith in God. So this way it gives them a loophole where they can open things up to get to their teaching where they really want to go. And this is one of those loopholes that he's doing right here. Now, certainly we know there are heavenly visions, in the Bible, like in Revelation, that John had. And that's pretty much a one of a kind vision. I'm sure you would agree with that. Revelation 4:2, he was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne in heaven, and one seated on the throne. And he sat there, the appearance of Jasper, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. That's the Apostle John in Revelation, and so that would be a divinely granted appearance. So, so it's like, I can concede that there are some of that, but the way Hagin is using it here, in my opinion, is he's trying to use this as a doorway to say, see, this gives me the okay to say I've had many experiences of divinely granted appearances. I don't know, if I'm making sense there. It's like that seems to be his loophole, that he's going to do this, because as we know, this book says he had 8 appearances from Jesus, and he does say he had more, but he didn't put them in the book. So
I just Googled that, divinely granted appearances.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I find that there's a link to that where he's talking about angels in our midst.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what he's doing here in the book, this is Acts 2:17, quoting the prophet Joel.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I just want to make that clear to everybody.
Yes.
That he's quoting Acts 2:17, where Acts quotes Joel. Yes. And so I do see the Amplified. I see another ministry that they're actually talking about the golden candlesticks, and I see the keyword divinely granted appearance. But other than the Amplified and Kenneth Hagin, I don't really find this.
Yes. And this is one of the points that I wanted to make, which is that when you're dealing with people who come up with peculiar translations or a peculiar idea that doesn't seem to match anything else and nobody else translates it this way, that usually should raise a red flag for anybody out there. When somebody comes up with a unique interpretation that has never been around before, or okay, like in this case, maybe you could throw that in there, like I say, just in the general sense of what I've mentioned. You could throw in some other visions from the Bible, here or there. But by and large, it does not seem to mean that. I think we would agree on that. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. I think we talked about last time how he kind of twists Mark 11.
Yes.
I believe it's verse 22 that says, have faith in God. And he twists it to say, have the God kind of faith.
Yes.
And again, I just Googled right now, have the God kind of faith. The only place where I really see that is coming from Kenneth Hagin. Absolutely. Anywhere else, it pretty much just says, have faith in God.